people going, whoa, if that's coming, we're out. So I hear these people. Some know they're lying. Others are so ignorant they bought it. I hear politicians say, we ought to stay in and reform the EU from within, like it's ever happened before. The idea is not to allow the EU to be reformed, i.e. power taken from the centre in any way. It's to focus it and concentrate it even more at the centre. The idea is to pull more and more countries in with open borders across Europe so that there is no control whatsoever by national governments of how many people from the EU pour into their country and overwhelm their public services, which is what's happening now. Plus all the other migration from outside the EU, the public services are collapsing. So that's what they plan. Not more of the same, but a dramatic increase on more of the same. And corporations, giant corporations, have had handed to them in the creation of the EU, not least because the same force controlling the corporations controls the EU and created it and advanced it to where it is now. The EU to corporations it's almost like a gigantic orgasmic creation, because before corporations, to get what they want in each country by changing the laws and policies to benefit them, of course goes on all the time, they had to work in each individual country with each individual government to get those laws changed. Now, thanks to the EU, they have a one-stop shop. All they've got to do is get policy changed by the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, and instantly every country in Europe becomes subject to those law changes that suit the corporations. This is why you can see on the internet a documentary about how corporations control the EU and how around the European Commission in Brussels, where the bureaucrats are, is like this explosion of offices for lobbying organizations working for giant corporations. And like I say, this is not meant to stay where it is now. It's meant to go much, much more extreme to reach their goal that they set out from the start to achieve, of a totally centralized European dictatorship. And so we have this negotiation going on, negotiation it says here, between the EU, the corporations, and America, over this trade agreement called TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And if they get what they want, it will mean that corporations can overturn or create or cause to happen massive fines for governments for changing the law or introducing legislation, maybe for the benefit of the environment, maybe for the benefit of people, maybe for the benefit of fairness, it does happen occasionally, of the people. But they would face corporate-type courts under this trade agreement. if a corporation complained to the court that those new laws, which may be, like I say, of great benefit to people, of great benefit to the environment, could affect their future profits. In other words, corporations would openly control governments instead of behind the scenes doing it now, and the ability to control governments will be massively advanced. Now note, this TTIP trade agreement is between the EU and the United States. If we come out, bye-bye TTIP. And, by the way, Sarah Wollaston, when you're changing sides because of some thing you don't agree with, said about the NHS, the corporations will make a case, supported by the EU, if this trade agreement goes through, that the National Health Service, the NHS, is affecting future profits of privatized corporations that deal in healthcare. It will be the end of the NHS. And this government, Cameron's government, knows it. That's why they're running it down and trying to make it as inefficient and chaotic as possible to dilute public challenge and outrage when they start this privatization process. Oh, well, you know, it can't be any worse privatized than it was run by the government. That's the psychological manipulation that we're seeing all the time. So when you realize that there is a hidden hand, like a spider's web, and people like top politicians and financial organizations like central banks and the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Central Bank, the European Union, the banking system, they're all attached an answer to this web. It's when you've done the research that I have over the last more than a quarter of a century, it's a head shaker every day when you turn the news on. You see Obama come out, webman. You see Merkel come out, web woman. You see the IMF come out. You see the Bank of England come out. All these expressions of this web that answer to the web, and the European Union is massively part of the web, they all come out, apparently spontaneously, apparently just saying what they think is best for people, telling us to stay in the EU, which is what the web wants. They're terrified of Britain coming out, because the idea is to pull more and more countries in and expand this superstate tyranny. Once one comes out, you know, it's not just vast numbers of British people who are sick of the EU, vast numbers of people across the EU are sick of the EU. And the pressure will be to start breaking up this tyrannical edifice. They're terrified. That's why they're throwing everything. You know, I'm waiting for the claim that, you know, if we come out, Godzilla will attack London the next morning. It's unbelievable. But this is what's happening. And so you have the Stay In campaign led by David Cameron and George Osborne. And this elite, not least the House of Rothschild, they have little pockets put into their shirts about here on either side, and Cameron goes in one and Osborne goes in the other. So when they open their mouths, it is this elite, this web talking. But then you look at this, and I have to say, from my point of view, this grotesque sight of the Labour opposition party, along with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party and the unions, all lining up shoulder to shoulder with these pocket people Cameron and Osborne, to press people to stay in the European Union. We have Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, who has been against the EU all his political career, now standing up and trying to make a case for it, including, sits back in amazement, shakes head, takes breath, that they would reform it from within. These are organisations that's supposed to, in some way, stand for fairness and justice and looking after the people who are victims of the system rather than running it. And they are campaigning with these right-wing zealots to stay in a centralised, undemocratic, bureaucratic superstate that is by the day deleting more and more freedoms from the people they allegedly represent. And I've said in previous video casts, the number of organisations that are campaigning to stay in, who are on the EU payroll, is fantastic. We have a situation where a number of people I've come across have said that they don't like the EU. They would really like to be outside, but they fear that if we come out, then the right wing, as it's perceived, the postage stamp, which they're all sitting on, that postage stamp political consensus currently run by the Conservative Party, would push on with austerity and injustice, unfettered, unstopped. A very important point to make here. The hidden hand that controls the Conservative Party in Britain and is pushing this austerity agenda is the same hidden hand that created, never mind controls, the EU. Thus, look at what the EU has done economically to Greece. It has destroyed it. It has got it into a situation where it's in enormous debt, a debt on money called credit that has never, does not, and will never exist. And as a result of that agreement, they have been asset stripped of state assets because the deal was, we'll give you this money that doesn't exist, that you can never pay back, and you will sell your assets basically for cents on the dollar to corporations, which is what's happened. And the idea of the EU control system is to asset strip the entire continent. So if anyone thinks that at least the EU will protect us from the extremes of the Conservative Party in Britain, well, forget it. That's not what the game is. We have Nicola Sturgeon, this left-wing kind of firebrand lady, who wants Scotland to come out of the United Kingdom and be an independent country within the European Union. An independent country within the European Union. If ever a contradiction in terms has ever been articulated, that is it. And she is vehemently campaigning to stay in the EU. Don't be controlled by London. Be controlled by Brussels. Oh my God. Talk about turkeys voting for Christmas. And then we have business, small business, medium-sized business, that is not a giant corporation. And they have been complaining, quite rightly, at the devastating effect on their businesses and ability to function of the deluge, the constant deluge of directives and new laws and regulations from the European Union. There's a reason for this. Why would an organization that cares about business and wants business to flourish crush them constantly with more and more red tape and bureaucracy, which has driven many of them out of business? Why would they? They wouldn't, because that's not the idea. The idea of making it harder and harder and harder to function as a small and medium-sized business, even some might be called, bigger business, is because the whole agenda is that eventually everything will be done by giant corporations, and there will be no small and medium-sized and less than giant corporation businesses. So once again, if you are involved in a business that is not a giant corporation and you're voting to stay in, right? Well, you too are turkeys voting for Christmas and Thanksgiving and any other appropriate analogy. Think what would happen if we came out and took control of our own country. We could take control of our borders so that we weren't seeing public services collapsing through sheer numbers. We could take control of our fishing grounds, which we gave away, Ted Heath gave away when he negotiated, the Prime Minister at the time, who negotiated us into this prison state. He gave away our fishing grounds in an island nation, and what has happened? It's destroyed the British fishing industry and many other things he gave away. And decades later, when he was asked on a BBC programme, did you know when you were negotiating entry into the common market, just a free trade area, nothing to worry about, that you were agreeing to political union at the time? He said, yes, of course. What he told the people at the time that we went in the early 1970s, was that he wasn't agreeing to political union, it was just a free trade area. And so when this MP, Sarah Wollaston, is talking about lies and then goes over to the Stay In campaign, the EU project has been based on lies, criminal, staggering levels of mendacity from start to now. And it's still going on in this campaign. And I emphasize again, this is not where it's meant to end. This is where we are now. They're now trying to stop coming out, but I've been writing about this since the 1990s, that this was the agenda of the EU. They're trying to stop coming out the fact that they are manipulating into place, as we speak, a European army. They want a European army and a European police force that overrides national sovereignty. And in all areas of our lives, they want to take complete control, including over the internet, what we can do on the internet, what we can't do on the internet. Already, the EU has impacted massively on internet freedom. And once again, that's nowhere near where they want to go. So ignorance is a devastating human trait, and it's systematic. The idea is to keep everyone ignorant of what's really happening, so what's really happening can go about its business unchallenged, unexposed, unseen. And I would say this, instead of listening to politicians and corporate CEOs and all these other system people before deciding what to do in this referendum on June 23rd, do your own research. People that have been with my work over the years do that. But those that haven't, do your own research into the history, the background of the European Union and what its real agenda is. It's in my books, it's in videos that I've done on the internet, and other documentaries are there from other people who've come up with the truth about the European Union. Get informed. And if you do, there's no way you will vote to stay in on June the 23rd. No way. My government will do this, my government will do that. Because, of course, we live in a democracy. And many things stood out, but this one in particular, because it's been a major area of my own research over the years, and that's the adoption of children. What the Queen's speech said the government was going to do was make it easier for children to be adopted and to make it quicker. Now, what they want is to increase the numbers. On one level, if you don't put things into context, people might say, well, that's fine, it's all right. Children are in care, they ought to be adopted, it would be better for them. And in some cases, that is correct, but that's not what I'm talking about. Forced adoption and the scandal of it is not about putting children into care who are being abused and then into adoptive situations. It's about the state stealing children from loving homes and loving parents on the most spurious, outrageous, invented, ludicrous criteria. And when I look at this proposal to speed up the adoption of children, what I see very clearly is another way of speeding up the forced adoption of children. Everything is context. If you don't have the context, whatever you're looking at cannot be seen in its entirety, in its true connect the dots meaning and relevance. And what I've been exposing in the books over the years is an agenda to constantly erode the influence of parents over their children, control of parents over their children's upbringing, on the way, longer term, though not as longer term as you would imagine, I'll come to that, to bring an end to parenthood, even longer term, an end to even producing children through parental procreation. You know, when I say that books like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and Eric Blair, George Orwell, and his book 1984 were not written anything like entirely from their imagination, but from knowledge of where this was going. That is being shown to be correct almost by the day, in the sense that what they were writing about, apparently in novels, has proved to be so staggeringly accurate in real world events and changes in human society. And Huxley was talking about the fact that children would be brought up in so-called world state hatcheries through laboratory means. And to get there through what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, step by step, so people don't see the pattern until it's too late, they have to prepare people for that, prepare the ground for it. And that means taking away the power of parents over what happens to their children. There are many ways this is being done, which I'll come to, but the most extreme and the most horrific is to create, as they have, a social services mafia designed to take as many children away from parents, loving parents, as they can get away with. The last figures I saw were that some 12,000 children in England alone, and this is happening in other places like the United States, are taken from parents and put into care and on into forced adoption as they do, against the will of the parents. 12,000. And the stitch up is staggering, because all this is done through secret courts without juries, who do not have to make decisions based on the criteria of evidence demanded in a criminal case. And so you have laws which prevent parents from even talking publicly about what has happened to their children and why they were taken away, and the case in general. Parents have been, and relatives have been jailed for doing that. This is free Britain we're talking about, it says here. And it's not only British, English families. Many families that have moved to Britain from abroad, who are here making their lives or careers, have had their children taken away. A few years ago, there was a meeting at the House of Commons involving representatives from 34 countries complaining about how members of their countries have had their children taken away by social services in England. And the parents have got no chance. You have the judge representing the system. You have social services representing the system. You have lawyers representing the system, and all in the pay of the system. And you have experts put in the witness box to say why, in their expert opinion, that these children should be taken from their parents, who are also of the system and are often in the pay of the very same authorities that are trying to take the children away. This state stealing of children hasn't come about by accident, by a series of things that happened and we just somehow got here. It's systematic, and it's part of this greater picture that we need to look at that puts what is happening in this situation into the context of that longer term agenda that I'm talking about. Of course, you know, when anything is appalling and horrific, then you'd think by reflex action that Tony Blair would be involved, and he was. During his time as Prime Minister, incentives, financial incentives were introduced for local authorities and social services to take more children away from parents and put them into adoption. Financial incentives. Because he said he wanted adoptions to increase by 50%. And now the heir of Blair, Cameron, is putting it out there in another way, worded slightly differently. But the aim is just the same, because they're both representatives of the same one-party state. We've had a situation where social workers have been sacked for opposing the forced adoption of children in various situations. And this is another part of what I'm talking about. As with the police, as with the law enforcement, as with the system administration in general, there has been a policy of recruiting more and more psychopathic-like people into social services. And by psychopathic-like, I mean with no empathy for the suffering they cause to others, like parents, loving parents. They've been recruited to carry out this policy. And decent social workers with something in here who look at cases on their merits and don't want to take children from situations they don't need taking from, they're being sifted out. Even, like I say, some of them openly fired for defying this policy and this pressure. Take the children, forced adoption, forced adoption. And we've had parents too who have been taken to these secret courts, had their children taken away from them for alleged abuse of them, who have then been cleared in courts, proper courts, of being involved in any abuse. But by the time they were cleared, their children had been forcibly adopted, and the system said, oh no, can't take them back now. This is what is happening. So put this into the context again of other things that are going on this road to the brave new world. Look at all the ways that parental influence and parental decisions are being eroded and taken away. Look at the power now, more and more, that's being given to schools and head teachers. You know, there was a case in the last week or so involving someone actually living where I do on the Isle of Wight, who was taken to the High Court, or went to the High Court, to take on the Isle of Wight ludicrous, in brackets, council, because they wanted to fine him, as unbelievable numbers of parents are being fined now in this country, for taking his child out of school in term time to go on holiday to Disney World for a week. They wanted to fine him for every day that he was away. And the child was not at school. He refused to pay. And it went to the High Court, and brilliant, the judgment went in his favour. But you watch the government now, Cameron, forced adoption Cameron, come back with ways to block that legal loophole and force everyone to be fined if their children don't go to school, go to prison is the correct way of putting it. see one of my other video casts in the last few weeks about schools as prisons. And so parents have to put their children in school, otherwise they get fined for every day that they don't. Then you've got a situation in Scotland, and for Scotland, read That's What They Want Everywhere, where they are appointing a state guardian, so-called named guardian, to every child at birth until aged 18 to oversee, on behalf of the state, the upbringing of that child, doing all the things that parents are supposed to do. And not only that, opening the floodgates of possibility to finding more and more reasons why children should be taken from their parents. This is a list of points that are made by those who have opposed this state guardian outrage, tyranny in Scotland. They point out that the scheme is compulsory. Every child will have a named person by law. They will have the power to assess confidential data on the family and to talk to a child without their parents agreeing with what they say. One piece of government guidance says a named person has, quote, responsibility for overall monitoring of the child's well-being and outcomes. That's what parents do. Idiots. Well, no. People administrating this into reality are just following orders and embarking upon idiocy by thinking this is justified. In the shadows, it's not idiocy at all. It's cold calculation on the road to the brave new world. The named person is legally responsible for monitoring the well-being of every child. On whose criteria? Oh, the state's got you. Government-funded guidance says well-being is another word for happiness, as this document asks, how can the state monitor the happiness of every child? But if the child is unhappy, well, maybe there's some emotional situation here involving the parents, and should they stay with the parents? And that's another thing. What Blair brought in as well was an expanded criteria for abuse, which involved emotional abuse, which you can ride a coach and horses through in terms of making it mean whatever you want. And that's what is happening. This vast increase in forced adoptions are invariably to do, not with physical abuse, but emotional abuse, according to the state, which they can just make up. There's always an expert on the payroll who will come in the witness box and say whatever you want. It says here, the current law says social services can intervene where a child is at risk of significant harm, but named persons can intervene merely where there are concerns about a child's well-being or happiness, yes, and then pass them on to social services. How parents in Scotland have allowed this to happen is beyond my imagination. There are a lot of people fighting this. Every single parent in Scotland should be involved in that. If you don't do it now, well, what's it going to be like further down the road? Because this is not the end of it. It's just where we are. And you've got, of course, lengthening of the school day. That's coming up more and more. Starting children even earlier. Some bloke involved in Ofsted, the government's kind of education organisation, is talking about putting children in school at the age of 2. God, it's madness. But from the shadows. It's cold calculation. Here we have a story this week. Mississippi bill requires teachers to grade parents. Now the teachers are grading parents according to parental response for requests for conferences and communication, the students' completion of homework and preparation for tests. Now the frickin' parents are at school. If this goes through. The frequency of the student's absence and tardiness. The student's overall grade per 9 weeks assessment. Look at where this is going, step by step. Another story this week. Ontario proposes forced re-education for parents who choose to not vaccinate their children. Of course, this is part of this other agenda connected to this one of forced vaccinations. When it comes to regulatory tyranny, this article says, Canada and the United States have been one-upping each other for some time. Put Britain in there as well, and many other countries. For most people who believe in medical choice, the march towards mandatory vaccination has raised an alarm. But for students of history, it should be forced re-education of any type that signifies when the final line is about to be crossed. Ontario, Canada, lovely place. In terms of those who run it. Ontario, Canada has a new proposal. Ontario holds Canada's highest population and has long been setting vaccine standards which have been trending towards authoritarian. Its new Immunisation 2020 initiative seeks to build upon decades-old policies requiring by law that students be vaccinated in order to attend school, as well as children attending licensed daycare centres. The amendments to the Immunisation of Schools Pupils Act would require parents and guardians who are considering not immunising their children for non-medical reasons to participate in an education session delivered by their local public health unit. Parents or guardians would have to complete the session before obtaining a vaccine exemption. And through the totalitarian tiptoe, no exemptions are what the plan is to introduce eventually. So here we have a situation where children coming to the world, they're straight in the authority situation of what we call the education system, very bravely and inaccurately. And they're increasingly forced to in various ways to have this total toxic shite pumped into them from the earliest ages in grotesque amounts, while their immune system is still developing. Will never be the same again after that. And now we're having parents fined for their children being away from school for a day. And we're having this grotesque forced adoption situation, taking children from loving parents. Anybody see a pattern here? Do you know, I think I do. And even the longer term pattern is clear to see. This is another story from this week. Secret meeting discusses synthetic humans. Now, as I've been writing over the years, the idea is to create a synthetic human which is created in laboratories and bring an end to parenthood, an end to procreation. That's the long-term goal. What is in Brave New World is the plan. So here we are, secret meeting discusses synthetic humans. The idea of creating a human out of chemicals in a lab may sound unsettling, but what may be more worrisome is that experts recently held a secret meeting to discuss the possibility. Now, when something is happening in public, when something's announced in public, this is what has been discovered, whatever, it's always light years behind where they are in the secret projects and the underground bases and the secret laboratories. So when it says in this story, well, they're not there yet, well, outside of the public arena, they will be either there or very close to it already. Around 150 medical researchers convened at Harvard Medical School to contemplate the concept of building a human genome with chemicals and ultimately bringing that person to life. Indicative of how controversial the proposal might be, attendees at the conference were forbidden to talk to the media or tweet about the event. When word of the meeting reached the greater scientific community, many expressed concern over the wealth of ethical issues, I could care less about them, which would arise from such an experiment. Others expressed chagrin over the secretive nature of the discussion, saying that the clandestine conference was unusual for scientific researchers. However, one of the event's organizers attempted to downplay the conspiratorial suspicions which had been attached to the meeting by explaining that the secrecy was necessary due to an impending scientific paper, blah, all right, yeah, okay. The article ends, but with our understanding of the human genome continuing to improve and the possibility looming far on the horizon, not so far as you think, the secret Harvard meeting may have provided us with a troubling glimpse of our species' future. Exactly. Context. Everything is context. If you don't put it, whatever you're looking at, in connection with other things, so the pattern, the picture can be seen, you can't understand what you're looking at. And in terms of the agenda for our children and parents, that pattern is getting clearer by the hour. Trade agreements. Now, anyone that's not come across these trade agreements that are currently being negotiated in secret might at this point say, oh, he's going to talk about trade agreements. What a bore. Oh, goodness me. In fact, this subject is fundamental to the lives of every man, woman, and child on the planet. And when later I go into some of the detail of what these agreements will mean for everybody, it will blow your mind if you've not come across it before. Oh no, they'd never do that. They are doing it. And they're doing it, like I say, in secret, because the things they are putting into place are so extreme, so fundamentally tyrannical, that they want to get them as close as possible to a done deal before people know what's in them, and thus squeeze the time they have to basically go crazy when they see what this all means. The three agreements are this. There's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP or TTIP, I've heard it called. That's an agreement being negotiated between the US and the EU. Then there's the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. That's between the US and the Pacific Rim countries, including New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and such like. And then there's CETA, which is between the EU and Canada. Now, they call them three agreements. They're not. They're one global agreement, given three names, to hide the fact that, well, it's a global agreement. And also to hide the fact, as I have been saying for all these years, there is a global force with a global agenda, and that is the force which is behind these trade agreements. I'll come more to that in a moment. What they are agreeing is to give virtually total power over everything to giant corporations. And as I explained in my books at length over the years, these giant corporations are ultimately, like the banks, owned by the same network. Thus, these trade agreements are giving control over virtually everything to this network I've been exposing for so long. One of the key things it allows corporations to do, all of them, because when I talk about one, I'm talking about all of them, they're all the same, is for corporations to take governments to a corporate court and get them to hand over vast amounts of taxpayers' money. If the court agrees, and it invariably will, because the same people are controlling that, if the court agrees that government policy, elected government policy, so-called democratic government policy, has had or is having a detrimental effect on corporate profits. I am not kidding. If environmental laws are put in place to protect the environment and to protect people from toxicity, from radiation, from all these things, a corporation can take that government to this court because those environmental laws to protect people by governments elected, at least in theory, by people, are having an adverse effect on corporate profits. And this is already happening with previous agreements. Now it's going global. Freedom of communication on the internet is right in the gun sights of these trade agreements, expanding and making more extreme copyright laws and such like, to stop people doing things on the internet that they do now. They are looking at food laws, laws to protect people from the adverse effects of food and stuff that's in food and how food's made and where it's made. Laws that have been built up over a long period. But, hold on a minute, that law you've just brought in that says we can't sell this kind of food because it's bad for people, that's bad for our profits. People aren't buying it anymore. Take you to court. And it's over this whole arena of regulation and what governments decide, sometimes on behalf of the people even, that these trade agreements are targeting. So regulations that are in place to try to protect people from the extremes of the financial system, i.e. look what happened in 2008, they are also, well, hold on a minute, you say we can't do this financially and we can't do that, that's affecting our profits. Then there's the aspects of these trade agreements which are about preventing, in effect, competition with state-owned industries. Thus, privatization of currently state, in theory, people-owned industries are also in the firing line of these agreements, because that is affecting private corporations, so they say. And in Britain, really at the centre of this is the National Health Service. You know, the National Health Service is not being privatised by stealth year on year on year, and being systematically destroyed by accident. It's by design. The more you make something not work that is in theory owned by the country, the more you're diluting opposition from people when you come along after these trade agreements and start privatizing it. Oh, well, it can't be any worse privatized than it is now. Yeah, because it's been run down on purpose, preparing for this. You look at all these laws that protect people, all these standards that are there to protect people. They're all the target of these agreements. In fact, there's simply one agreement. Workers' rights is another. Diluting and diluting safeguards for the way that people are treated by employers. It's a massive dismantling of everything that's been built up to protect the public and protect the freedom of the public from these gigantic corporations that are already far more powerful than governments. And this week we've had Obama and Merkel in Germany talking about it. And when these two, there are many others I could name as well, but when these two speak, it's the cabal, it's the global network speaking. They're just pawns, willing pawns, but pawns of this network that puts them into power so long as they do what they're told when they're in power, i.e. the network's in power. Headline, time for US-German leadership. Obama, Merkel pushing EU into unpopular TTIP free trade deal. US President Barack Obama wants to complete talks on the US-EU free trade deal before his term ends in January. However, while he enjoyed the warm support of German Chancellor Merkel in Hanover, public support for the highly secretive deal is waning. It's waning for one simple reason. As it leaks out, bit by bit, from the secrecy, what these trade agreements will involve, people are becoming increasingly horrified, quite rightly, by what they're hearing. I don't anticipate that we will be able to complete ratification of a deal by the end of this year, but I do anticipate that we will have completed the agreement, Obama said at the Industrial Trade Fair in Hanover during a briefing with Angela Merkel. The US president warned that time was ticking, claiming that things would become unpredictable once he is out of office. Nonsense! If Hillary Clinton replaces him, it will be business as usual, probably with all the others as well, when it comes down to it, rather than the rhetoric before. Merkel expressed support for Obama's call to speed things up. We should get a move on, she said. We all know the reproaches, worries and fears and what difficulties remain, but never mind what the public think and what people are concerned about. Do it anyway. My masters said so. Merkel argued that the trade deal would boost current living standards. That is what has been said by every other trade deal, and it's never happened. The only thing that's assured by previous experiences is that this trade deal, in fact, will cost enormous numbers of jobs that people currently have. So my request, said Merkel, is that you should do it, and then we can have great success this year. Have a party with their masters. Hey, we did it then. The TTIP's goal is to create the largest free trade zone in the world by reducing trade barriers between the US and European Union. This is the thing, you see. They talk about removing trade barriers as if it's a good thing. And they talk about free trade. It's free. You see that word, free? It's free trade. Who can be against free trade? But of course, it's not free trade. It's freedom to exploit trade. It's freedom to dominate trade. It's freedom to put the opposition out of business trade. That's what it's all about. And then there was this other story this week. Even the British government's own TTIP assessment says US-EU deal has lots of risks and no benefits. It's a Freedom of Information request that revealed this document, this assessment, by the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills in the British government. When the assessment found little reason to believe the EU-US investment chapter, as the deal is sometimes called, would give the UK significant political or economic benefits. It's not there to do that. It's to give corporations controlled ultimately by the same network the political and financial benefits and control benefits. The report also examined the issue of secret courts where investor-state dispute settlement proceedings would allow US firms, this is talking about this one, but it's the same with all the others, US firms to sue national governments. The authors argue that we would expect an EU-US investment chapter to be regularly invoked by US investors against the UK for governmental actions that would normally not be challengeable under UK law. See, the whole dynamic of power in the world is being handed to these corporations through these trade agreements currently being negotiated in secret. And that's why, this is a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed by everybody. Because if they don't, they'll deeply regret it not too far from now. Global Justice Now director Nick Dearden gave a withering assessment of the deal and of the government's analysis of it. He called it staggering that the government was pushing the UK into a system of, quote, secret corporate courts under TTIP, with almost no assessment of what the risks are for our policymakers or the taxpayer. What's even worse is that the one assessment that the government has commissioned shows that there are lots of risks and no benefit. The toxic trade deal promises, quote, harmful consequences for ordinary people and new powers and privileges for corporate elites, Dearden said. There's going to have to come a point, eventually, where those who you might call of the left or progressives and those challenging government impositions in the mainstream will have to grasp at last the fact that these things are not happening by accident. They're not happening purely through corporate greed. They are globally orchestrated to a global agenda, which I lay out in detail in the books and will do on the world tour coming up. And therefore, things that are shocking and unbelievable, how could they do this, to those that will not see the global conspiracy and the connections, are perfectly explainable to people who do and can see it. So when the question is asked, why is the UK government not challenging this trade agreement and all the things that are in it for all the terrible things that are going to happen if it goes through, is because the same network that controls the trade agreement and the negotiation of the trade agreement is the same network that controls ultimately the UK government and the EU bureaucracy. and the US government, the Canadian government, the Australian government, the New Zealand government. The penny is dropping for more and more people, but still vast numbers who really should know better will not let the penny drop on what we're actually looking at. So this is how these trade agreements fit into that structure. If you are going to control the majority, the mass of people, when you are the tiny few comparatively, you have to centralize decision making. The more points of decision making there are, the more diversity of decision making, the more devolution of decision making from the center, the less control you're going to have over it. So what you want for the few to control everyone else is to constantly centralize decision making until eventually there's just a tiny few at the global center dictating everything. That's what these trade agreements are moving us massively, massively towards. It's what the European Union's about. From countries making decisions, diversity, to a bureaucracy in Brussels making decisions. From governments all over the world making decisions to these secret corporate courts deciding what can and cannot happen everywhere. And I say to those people of the left, the progressives, who will oppose these trade agreements as they are, but then dismiss and laugh at the idea there's a global conspiracy, wake the fricking hell up! Because you're never going to see what's going on and what these really mean until you do so. The structure that this is moving towards is a world government controlled by the few, world central bank controlling all global finance, world currency, cashless currency, no other currencies. That's why we go into the cashless society, as I've been warning about in my books now for 25 years. A world army imposing the will of the world government. Then there's these super states like the EU and others that are planned around the world, these unions at the second level. And all these areas of life controlling biotech, food, water, environment, energy, all of them will actually be controlled by private companies, private giant companies, in concert with the world government, which won't even be elected in truth, just like the European Union is a government that claims to have an elected parliament, got no bloody power. The bureaucrats call the shots. And therefore, these trade agreements can be seen in that context of pushing so much in a massive step towards this structure I'm describing. There are many other aspects to it as well. And the idea is that there will be no big business or medium-sized business or small business, just gigantic global corporations controlling everything. Now, look at these trade agreements in that context. And the reason that smaller businesses are constantly complaining that they are being destroyed and strangled by constantly increasing regulation is because the idea is to destroy them. Oh yeah, we must support small business, they say. It's the last thing they want. Small business is going to go. Medium-sized business, even what we now call big business, is designed to be absorbed, all of it, by these gigantic corporations. And what we've seen, for instance, is this process before our eyes. First of all, when I was a kid, we had little shops and small businesses. That was basically the foundation of everything. So then the grocer on the corner of the street, they were all basically absorbed, swallowed up by the great big supermarkets. Now the supermarkets are in the process of being swallowed in terms of their business, etc., by gigantic corporations like Amazon, who are just now starting to deal in food. And so if people just walk away and just let these trade agreements happen, then the world that we have been living in up to this point, even with all the impositions that we've had so far coming in all the time, deletions of freedom, we are going to go even from that into a whole new world of centralized corporate control, dictatorship, and no other word for it, fascism. And this is not by accident, but by cold, calculated design. And if people don't start opening their fricking minds to what's really going on, as opposed to, oh, it's all just corporate greed, that's all it is, then we're going to continue going down this road, because those that should be challenging it will be in denial of the fact that this global force is dictating their lives in ever greater detail, day after day after day. It's time to wake up to what's going on, or face the consequences very soon. Even by the history of such organizations who think it's fine to throw mud in all directions in the hope that it will stick. And what they asked was that people contacted the venue, and pretty much the same happened with Dublin the following week, and complained that they were having this modern-day anti-Semitic hate preacher at their theatre. Now, this guy Silverman was not in the audience in Manchester. Sits back in amazement. He's saying that, and he's not in the audience. No. Never let the facts spoil a good story, or a good hatchet job to silence someone who's saying things you don't want people to hear. Not that he knows really what I'm saying in the 12-hour talk, because he hadn't seen it. And then you have people sending emails on the back of what he said I'm going to say, complaining that they're having me on because I'm going to say this when I'm not going to say it. Now, this is not just about me. This is very, very important, particularly now, for reasons I'll come to later. So this was Stephen Silverman and the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism saying all this. Now, to their enormous credit, the Apollo in Manchester and the Helix Theatre in Dublin let it go ahead. Of course they did. I've been speaking at O2 venues for decades. They know exactly what I'm saying, and it's nothing like what these idiots. Ooh, getting passionate there. I wonder why. I'll say. So let me show you that, and maybe show them that. Here is an image that I use in the talk. Whoa, that's racist, isn't it? What I'm actually saying in the talks are that we become obsessed with race when what we are is consciousness, awareness, having experiences in different situations, and that whatever colour, creed, background, our, quote, body is. I'll come more to that in a second. They're just vehicles for experience. And so my philosophy is impossible to equate with racism, because I'm saying that race is irrelevant, and that getting to a point where you do, they ask anybody who was in the audience in Manchester who witnessed the performance to email them describing what happened. What they were expecting, of course, in their stunning levels of ignorance. Oh, he said this and he said that. No. They were inundated with emails from members of the audience. I know that because a lot of them forwarded copies on to us, with people saying, he never said any of that stuff you said he was going to say. He, in fact, said the opposite, talked about love, talked about everything being one consciousness, and that the divisions of labels, including race, are illusory nonsense. So, Mr. Stephen Silverman, are you going to apologize? Now you've been told that what you said I was going to say and tried to stop me speaking as a result is a nonsense. Are you even going to publish the emails from the audience so that people can see what I actually said? And indeed, we've got an audio version of the talk to show that you're talking complete nonsense. And if this was an isolated situation, it would be bad enough, but it's not. This use of anti-Semitism to silence people who are legitimately questioning and investigating aspects of what are called Zionism is going on all over the world and is designed to silence that legitimate investigation and that legitimate exposure. So let me explain what I'm talking about when I challenge the extremes of the regime in Israel and the inner circle of the Zionist movement. First of all, Zionism is not about race. It's a political philosophy. It's a political movement. And there are many, many Jewish people all over the world who fiercely, vehemently oppose Zionism. Then there are great swathes of Jewish people in the world who support Zionism as support for the existence of Israel and for the way they perceive Zionism to be. What I'm saying, however, is that there is a cabal at the center of Zionism, not least connected to the House of Rothschild, that is in effect, more than in effect, a secret society. And it's that secret society, not everyone else, it's that core secret society that is manipulating within the wider web of manipulation. And that needs to be legitimately investigated. You know, when, for instance, you have the chairman of the US Federal Reserve, the privately owned Central Bank of America, going back to Reagan Bush, everyone since then, Alan Greenspan, Bernard Bernanke, Janet Yellen, have been Zionists, right up to present day, where Janet Yellen is chairman of the Federal Reserve and Stanley Fischer is vice chairman. He used to be head of the Bank of Israel. Now, when you think that the entire Jewish population of America is 2%, then take away all these, the great majority of the Jewish population who are either opposing Zionism or don't really appreciate what it is at its core. And what you're left with is a tiny few people from the secret society level that have an extraordinary ratio in terms of positions of influence and power. Now that is legitimate journalistic investigation. If that was the case with Chinese people heading the Federal Reserve, president after president, party after party, decade after decade, or Hispanic people, or any other people and identifiable group, people would legitimately, even mainstream media probably, would say, hold on a minute, what's going on here? So why is it different when there's a common theme of Zionism? Why have Zionists had such influence in the Treasury Department of the United States, right up to present day with Trump? Why is it that the leader of Israel, which I say is the fiefdom of the Rothschilds, and Israelis are just being used as a, if you like, something to hide that behind. Why does someone like Benjamin Netanyahu have so much influence, have such a voice on the world stage, when he is the leader of 8 million people in a world of 7.4 billion? These are legitimate questions that any journalist worth the name would be asking. And if there are fair enough answers to it, then fair enough. But to say they can't be highlighted and can't be asked simply because groups of people systematically hurl anti-Semite at you whenever you question the actions of Zionism, not least in relation to Palestinians, and the actions of the Israeli government. But they seem to believe that they should, unlike everybody else, be immune to criticism and questioning. And this whole anti-Semitic network of accusers has actually been built up decade after decade after decade, not to protect Jewish people from prejudice. I condemn prejudice of any kind. It's another, when you come from the point of view that we're all one consciousness, prejudice of any kind on the basis of religion, race, whatever, is not just horrible, it's ridiculous. And the confirmation of ignorance about the nature of reality itself. But that's not what much of this "he's an anti-Semite, she's an anti-Semite" network globally is all about. It's about silencing legitimate investigation and questioning of the actions, behavior, and goals of the Zionist secret society. And even this whole thing, anti-Semitism, is a complete nonsense, in the sense that what is Semitic? What does it mean? Semitic describes a series of language groups, primarily in North Africa and the Middle East, going back a long, long time. The Phoenicians were Semites in the Semite language group. And the vast, overwhelming majority of people who speak one of the Semitic languages today are those that speak, irony of irony, Arabic. Even the very term, even the very label, is based on a complete misunderstanding. But this is the whole foundation of it. It's to turn anti-Semite into a term of abuse, and then hurl it in all directions at those people who are questioning the actions of Zionism. And here's a question. Why do people who say they're anti-hate behave with so much hatred? Why are people who say they're anti-racist so utterly obsessed with race? They see it everywhere. They self-identify with it. And they hurl then the term racist at people like me who are saying, actually, all of us, Arab, Jew, as we use the labels, middle-class Americans, Danish, South African, black, white, we're all the same consciousness having different experiences. You couldn't make it up, but you don't have to, because they do. And we have an organization like operating out of America and globally that calls itself the Anti-Defamation League. You know what it does? It goes around defaming people. In the same way we have anti-haters going out hurling hate at people. And anti-racists obsessed with race. And it's particularly important now for reasons of Donald Trump. I'm going to come to that in a second, but there's another couple of stories this week that kind of support what I'm saying here. This is one. Israel conference called off for security reasons after complaints from Jewish community. An academic conference to discuss the legitimacy of Israel has been postponed by an Irish university citing security reasons. What, there were threats of violence if it went ahead? Is that what that means? After complaints from the Jewish community labelling it a biased anti-Israel event. If it was an anti-American event, an anti-British event, even an anti-Irish event, no problem. So what's with the special treatment wherever you look? This is a legitimate question a journalist should be asking. The seminar was due to convene at University College Cork in March, but has been called off due to, quote, inadequate security infrastructure and staffing, amid reports of planned protests at the event. Anyone remembers free speech? You must be getting on there. The conference was entitled International Law and the State of Israel, Legitimacy, Responsibility and Exceptionalism. This is the second time the conference has been pulled due to security reasons. In 2015, the University of Southampton cancelled the event, citing similar reasons. However, members of the Irish for Israel organisation who contacted the Cork University asking them to cancel the event have claimed the move as a win. Oh, free discussion, free expression has been deleted. Whoa! Result. Stand With Us Israel spearheaded the email campaign to the president of the university, describing the conference as, quote, another example of shameful hatred and discrimination masquerading as an academic conference. Again, hateful, hatred. You question Israel, you've got to be hateful. It's cause and effect, apparently. The group claimed the conference, quote, deliberately shuts out voices of those it doesn't agree with and seeks to push an hateful agenda. Hateful again. Now, I did just read that, didn't I? Let me do that again. The group claimed the conference deliberately shuts out voices of those it doesn't agree with, like Zionist organizations are doing to people all over the world whenever they challenge Israel. The hypocrisy is a shocker. Following the cancellation of the event, the University of Southampton organisers unsuccessfully challenged the decision in the High Court to be stopped from speaking in the Southampton University, and since then it has had difficulty securing a host for the conference, of course, because the hosts get contacted. They don't want the hassle. They've got backbones of jelly. They care more about their own personal situation than they do about freedom of speech, and so this is why these people can't have their discussion. But if it was a discussion about Israel in the opposite terms to what was being or planned to be discussed there, not a problem. And this is why what I'm talking about here is important. Because Donald Trump is the most vehemently pro-Israel, Israel right or wrong, president since Israel was created. They are going to be allowed to do basically whatever they like without resistance from the United States. And we're already seeing it, and they know that's the case. We have had, since Trump was elected, never mind inaugurated, announcements of more and more building of Israeli settlements, thousands and thousands of buildings in occupied Palestinian land in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we are seeing Israel, its leaders, becoming more and more belligerent and up yours since Trump won the election. This is the Prime Minister Netanyahu this week. Israel PM, new settlements, just a taste of things to come in Trump era. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that the latest settlement approval is just a taste of the new measures, which will be taken now that Barack Obama is no longer US president. Quote, we are leaving the period. The building approval was a taste. We are going to be doing many things differently from now on, said Netanyahu while addressing the Israeli parliament on Wednesday. The Israeli approval for these new settlements came 2 days after a phone conversation between Trump and Netanyahu in which regional issues were discussed, and the Israeli Prime Minister was invited to Washington in February. Despite recent resolutions against the illegal settlements, the United Nations Security Council refrained from taking any measures against the move following a closed-door meeting held on Wednesday. And the resolution that went through condemning these Israeli settlements in Palestinian-occupied land only went through in the last breaths of the Obama regime because, for the first time, the United States abstained and didn't veto such a resolution, I think you can safely say, now Trump's in, that that's the last time that will happen. And then there is this guy this week, Israeli Defense Minister, this guy Lieberman. Army will go full force in future wars. Collapsing EU shouldn't lecture Israeli defense chief. And he said, again in this Trump era, that the army, the Israeli army, will stop at nothing to defeat the enemy in conflicts to come, and they won't stop until the adversary waves a white flag. He also slammed attempts by third parties to what he called meddle. Speaking at a two-day security conference in Tel Aviv, Lieberman, a longtime ally of Netanyahu, said that the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, will fight till the bitter end and not settle for half measures. It doesn't matter, he said, where the next conflict breaks out. It has to be at full strength. You recruit the entire army, the entire reserves, you go full strength until the end, until the other side raises the white flag. We will not stop in the middle. If a quarter of the strip is needed, then we occupy a quarter of the strip. If more, then more. And this is why understanding why this label of anti-Semite is thrown around like confetti, why it's done and why it's being done now. Because things are going to happen through Israel, thanks to Trump, that are going to need to be exposed. And the Palestinians, who are just starting the next nightmare, quite possibly their worst nightmare, now Trump's in, are going to need the support of people around the world. And if we bow to intimidation, if progressives buy the nonsense put out by these organizations, then we are going to concede the right to publicly challenge the behavior of Israel and expose its agenda. And that must not happen. We need some backbone here, out of sheer decency. And so, Mr. Stephen Silverman, publish the emails from the audience in Manchester. Apologize for the grotesque misrepresentation of what I am saying in these talks. And to everyone else, yes, there are people who are racially anti-Jewish. There are people who are racially anti-Muslim, racially anti-black, anti-Hispanic, anti-Asian. Of course those racists exist. They're idiots. But we must not allow those who are genuinely trying to uncover what's going on in the world and why, to be tarred with them and thus silenced in the name of